Welcome to the Attention Please podcast, now on video. If you like this podcast, kindly like, share, subscribe. You know what to do. So, today we will be talking about India versus Trudeau. If a few years ago you told me that the relationship between India and Canada would be worse than the relationship that we currently have with Pakistan, I would have asked you, what are you on? But it seems to be that this is where we are at currently. Um, for those of you who have been living under a rock who don't know what's been going on, so Prime Minister Trudeau, after a fairly disastrous visit to India, which, I mean, that could be the reason why it was a disastrous visit, went onto the floor of the Canadian Parliament, their House of Commons, and made this accusation against India, which is pretty much this most serious accusation you can level at another nation state, of essentially being a terrorist state. So they're basically accusing India of being a terrorist, yes, as a country, because the accusation is that the Indian government masterminded the assassination of a Canadian citizen. Again, he kept on mentioning him as just as a Canadian citizen, uh, as if that's the real thing about it. It's like referring to Osama bin Laden as a Saudi engineer. So again, the accusation is that the Indian government agencies, through the offices of the Indian embassy, apparently masterminded this hit on Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who's and this is the fact, who has an Interpol red corner notice issued on him since 2014. So he's pretty much a recognized international criminal, and he's been involved in separatist. I mean, that's no secret that he's a separatist. I mean, I don't think even the Canadian government is denying it. But conducting separatist activities of another quote unquote friendly country is perfectly legal in Canada. It's also, I mean, it really is legal in Canada. But I think what the accusation here is that, again, India has violated international law, and that Hardeep Singh Nijjar is just purely an activist. That's really the way he's referred to in Canadian media. Is, again, they do not highlight his criminal/terrorist antecedents, what he has been accused of, what he continuously keeps on doing, essentially masterminding. Um, see, again, he's been accused of basically planning the bombing that killed 6 Indian citizens. And again, you can read all of this on the net. There's nothing special that I'm putting out here on the podcast. That's just his background. And he's been continuously been accused of inciting quote unquote revolutionary activity, including violence, in India. So how do we parse this? How do we even, try to understand what's been going on? So without getting at least my own emotions and being involved, let's try to analyze this kind of clinically. So first, there are only two things that can realistically happen. Either India did it or India didn't. I mean, that's fairly obvious, P or not P. So why? What is the evidence that India did nothing? First of all, Trudeau hasn't provided even an iota of proof. Everything stands on his words, as Canadian media keeps on saying. Pretty overtly, I would say that it's the word of a Canadian, which is white European. Um, and India, and we know who they are. Like, they're not like us. Yeah, right. No racism here at all. So it is based purely on the words of this um, one man, and of course, uh, being Canadian again. I just find that so outrageous. They say it so overtly. They don't even get the overt racism, or is it covert racism, in what they're actually saying, because they contrast him to India and say, this guy reliable. It's reliable because he said it in Parliament. Why would he say it otherwise? I mean, which Canadian would ever lie to Parliament? India, and their democracy. But anyways, um, so before we, so it there's really nothing in the accusation as of yet. Now, the reason may be, and again, um, since we are trying to be dispassionate and clinical, it could be that he'll bring out something. I'm pretty sure he will. I'm pretty sure this is not going to be where he's going to stop, because otherwise he's absolutely made a fool of himself, which of course Trudeau could very well do. He's not the brightest bulb in the lot. So that he could have done. This could be the end of the story, actually. But before we get to that, let's just understand that when we say the word Khalistani, I think we do ourselves a disservice, and I'm going to do this disservice in this discussion because I'm going to refer to them as Khalistanis. But that's because the word Khalistan means something. It's basically a separatist movement on the lines of the secession of Kashmir. And just to even use the word Khalistani movement kind of legitimizes it as something that actually exists, whereas it actually doesn't. There is no on-the-ground support for Khalistan at this moment. So even saying that they represent the Khalistani movement is in itself, as I say, not true, because there is no Khalistani movement. So who are they? What do they actually want? These people who call themselves Khalistanis, but there doesn't seem to be any objective in terms of strategic political objectives of seceding Punjab or whatever they think Khalistan should constitute. And I've seen that it constitutes pretty much entire North India from, I don't know, North India. Anyways, so they are essentially right now, the Khalistani activists are essentially a loose collection of warring criminal factions. They're engaged, and this is a point that Sher Bil Panag made in Barkhadat's show, is they're basically engaged in human trafficking. So this fiction of an Indian state that terrorizes Sikhs and anybody who doesn't agree with the government is a convenient fiction for them to apply for refugee status, because they're basically in the business of moving human beings, that's the human trafficking portion, illegally from Punjab to Canada. So, and there is a lot of truth to this. I can say this in a different context, because once I was in a limo, it's a long time ago, with a Bangladeshi driver who was telling me he was a limo driver, and we had a good conversation in Bengali. It's a long drive from where I used to stay in Long Island to JFK. So he actually said, and he told me a lot of great stories, but one of the stories that he said was that in Bangladesh there is the way he got US citizenship. So I was an F1 student at that point. He said, well, you're not a US citizen? How long does it take you to become a US citizen? We get US citizenship in a few years. And so then he said the way he does it is that there is and he himself said that I was never in Bangladeshi politics, but in Bangladesh, if you go and pay some money, they will put your name in the diary of Zia, who was one of the dictators, after Sheikh Hasina came into power. So they would put you in certain political registers, and then you could say that you were being persecuted by the current government. We said I never did any politics at all in my life, but I just paid the money to the tout who went and put my name in that list, in that retroactive list of political undesirables, and that's how I got my citizenship. So that really is essentially what the Khalistani Andolan nowadays is. That's why the facade of the Andolan has to be maintained, that there is an agitation going on. It's obviously linked to, for those of you who follow Punjab and Punjabi politics, it's linked to the drug menace in Punjab. There are large farmers who essentially the drug menace I read somewhere, essentially one that comes out of boredom. I mean, you have so much money that comes out of passive income. What are you going to do all your day? So the point I'm trying to make is the Khalistani movement, air quotes, is really a loose collection of warring criminal factions at this point of time, and they're kind of engaged in human trafficking. Some of them have, drug trafficking arms in the home country, and there's no support. There's no ground support for any of this. Now, this entire thing was kind of on the back burner till 2019, the farmers' agitation. Obviously, many of them saw an existential threat to where the real source of income comes from. I mean, criminal activity is only like the kind of a garnishing. I mean, the real activity is the real place where the money comes from. That's a legitimate source. That's farming. That's large farming. And so the 2019 Farmers Bill was was an attempt by the Indian government to kind of, and that was not the real objective of it, but it would have led to that. It would have led to a shift of power from the entrenched big farmers in Punjab to a different to a different set of people, rather, because they also now control the middleman business. And that was really the where this farmers bill, that was the attack, it was where they were attacking. The farmers bill was trying to destroy this middleman that had come, and that is so detrimental to the interests of small farmers. But it's good for the big farmers because they're the middleman themselves, right? So that is why the farmers bill agitation was such a huge deal, and the Indian government had to back down because of the sheer amount of money that came. And that money came from places like Canada to fund that that agitation. And so this kind of all feeds into the narrative that the farmers bill is essentially the Hindu right-wing government's attempt to clamp down on Sikh farmers. It was absolutely communalized in the communication within Canada. So it was not a policy decision. It never was. And you can see how powerful these people are. I mean, and the reason why I'm saying this is, I mean, Trudeau might be, and again, if Trudeau is lying, this is entirely, everything that I'm saying is under the presumption that Trudeau is basically making it up, is that they can basically make Trudeau say anything. I mean, if you can make Rihanna become your IT cell, man, you have some amount of money power. I will give that to you. And Trudeau will sell much cheaper than Rihanna. So why would Trudeau make something up? And when I say make something up, I'll possibly weaken that statement. I don't think he's totally made something up, but yeah, we'll come to that. So why would he do that? Well, the target is obviously Modi. The target has always been Narendra Modi and the BJP government, right? So you can see Rahul Gandhi doing that. I mean, he goes to international forum. It's pretty obvious what he's trying to do. He's trying to get India, trying to lay the groundwork for India being declared a pariah state. You know, that terrible term, the North Korea, Russia, essentially states which do not obey the rule of law, states that have passed on to quote unquote dictatorship, even if they are nominally democracies. I don't think North Korea is nominally democracy, but that's really the angle. That's exactly what that's exactly what many of our media mavens who write for Washington Post and New York Times, they try to hammer that again and again, that India is a terrible country. India is not really a democracy anymore. India is a fascist country. And so one of the things that a fascist country does is that they do not obey international law, that they go on and, essentially declare war on states. So this kind of feeds into the narrative. This is why Trudeau is doing it, of course. In my opinion, if India did nothing, again. Now, again, there's another thing. Could India have done it? Let's say India wanted to do it, but could India have done it? Because this isn't like what the Saudis did for Khashoggi. Because he went to their embassy. Once he was in embassy, he was basically in their den. So they could, at that point of time, they had all the cards. But it's not like India killed somebody who came into their embassy, right? India actually, if India had done this, India's done something which is fairly what we haven't seen Indian intelligence pretty much doing, at least. In a country like Canada, it's not like the Badlands of Afghanistan. This is Canada. It's Canada. So to kind of launch an operation in Canada, and this person is well defended also. Well defended by his community. He doesn't go out much. He's not, just a person who's just going to holiday somewhere. No, he very well is aware that he's a terrorist and he's a wanted man. So how, just for me, could Indian intelligence have done this efficiently is itself a concern. Now, that skepticism remains. But again, this is all under the presumption that India did nothing. I would again say it's kind of, I would always say, and again, India badal gaya and all that, but okay. Now, but even then, why would Trudeau still say this? Because first of all, I think politics ultimately comes down to the personal. Virtually everything ultimately comes down to the personal. And Trudeau had a torrid time in India recently. He's recently and in the last few years. He's been an embarrassment. Every time he's come to India, he's somehow stepped in it. And one of the reasons, of course, is because of his support to the Khalistani agitation. It's very, very well known. It's not something which he's done. It's something which his father used to do too. He was a prime minister too. So he's had bad, humiliating photo ops. He's himself not helped things by kind of, wearing Indian traditional attire as if it was a costume. So what this could ultimately be is just, him lashing out. Just, I don't like these guys. They screw me up every time. I have, I have a audience which would, appreciate this kind of move. So he's very much in bed with the again, the quote unquote air quote Khalistanis, even though they're 2% of the electorate. It's just that they're very organized as a community. So the reason why politicians in any place, when the whole notion of a vote bank politics is that when you have an organized community who vote as a group, you obviously do not want to let them go. Because no matter how many votes they bring you and no matter how much money they contribute to your cause, they are organized. You can always count on them. And Trudeau's political capital is actually fairly low at this point of time. So he's trying to desperately hold on to his core support base. And this is a very solid core support base that he has. So what Trudeau did was essentially he did a political move. It's just a shoot and scoot. He's not going to give any evidence. He's just going to throw it out there and he's going to let people run with it. And essentially what he's doing is he's covering up a gang war. This was originally what people thought, that this was just another shooting. Because again, they are criminal gangs. So it was one gang basically offing the other. Sultan of Delhi inside in Canada. So there is another problem, and so we really give the evidence. Well, if no evidence exists, you will obviously not give it. But there might be another angle to this. First of all, how the evidence was obtained. So it could very well be, and that was what was hinted in what I heard in Canadian on channels, is that it's basically based on signal intelligence. That is, they picked up some kind of communication between Indian embassy staffers, not them, but one of their partners, their Five Eyes, which is really 5 European countries who are pals. So one of them, and it's presumed it's US, picked up. So basically the US were spying on our embassy staff. So even the evidence is not legally acquired. So all of this talk about legality, blah, 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 even the evidence is possibly not legally acquired, which is why he has to pussyfoot around presenting it. Because the immediate thing is, well, you're accusing us of having done something illegal, but you did something illegal first. So in any kind of court case, the evidence has to be obtained legally, right? And one of the suppositions that I have is the evidence is not even fully gathered legally. So it could be, what could it be? So now you would say, well, then I'm saying evidence. That means it did happen. Well, you really don't know because we don't know anything, right? It could be some rando guy in the Indian embassy telling somebody else, "Dekha kaise humne thok diya usko." How he killed him. And that's it. They said, some kind of braggadocio going on. So yeah, we have evidence, because they're not really looking for evidence. The whole thing is a shoot and scoop. They just want to have one little thing they can hang their hat on and they will run with it. So this could be something like this. And again, this is all under the presumption that India didn't do it. If you'd asked me initially, that was my first reaction. Not because I'm defensive. As a matter of fact, I think it should be the other way around. I basically think that India couldn't do it because India had never done it. In order for India to pull off something like this, I would have to think that the Indian government works efficiently and can attain its objectives. And just my life experiences have never been like that. We have never been able to assassinate or do anything to any of the Bombay blasts masterminds. We haven't. Not just the D, but nobody. So it just seems, and they're in Pakistan, where I would say it's easier to infiltrate because, hey, we kind of look like them. But in Canada, I just find it difficult to believe. But which brings me to the second part. What if India did do it? They could have, in which case Trudeau isn't lying. So why did India do it? And is this terrible? So let's try to answer that question. So, first of all, we have to understand that Canada is to Khalistanis, the Khalistan agitation. And again, I use air quotes. It's not just political agitation, it's basically a loose collection of criminal activity. Is what the Taliban was to Al Qaeda. And Taliban was also basically a criminal government, and so was Al Qaeda. It's essentially a criminal, drug trafficking, arms dealing. So it's the political objectives are secondary. So it's fairly the analogy isn't just being provided for drama. It is true. This is what's backed by history. So again, it's a long thing to go into here. So I'll just kind of quickly go over some of the points about the Kanishka tragedy and the Kanishka bombing. So this happened in the early 1980s. Most of us know about it, so I'm not going to go into any details. So the basically Khalistani terrorists, this was really what I think almost in a huge way made the whole Khalistani agitation front page news across the world, was that they brought down a Air India plane. They put a bomb in. They put another bomb, and that bomb exploded on the baggage check area. So there are two bombs. One bomb made its way and exploded, and it happened, I think, in Ireland, where the bomb actually exploded, killing close to 320, mostly Canadian citizens, but they were Indian origin Canadian citizens. So just a brief history of Canada's persistent and consistent support to Khalistani terrorists, real terrorists. So the person who was the mastermind behind Kanishka, everybody knew he was the leader of the terrorist organization. It was not just some guy who came out of the cold. No, everybody knew it. Indira Gandhi had made repeated attempts, the Congress government at that point of time, to Trudeau Sr. to extradite this person or to investigate him. They just refused to do anything. And this is on record. I read about it recently. I was like surprised. But Trudeau's basic reason for not cooperating with India was that India was sufficiently not respectful to the Queen. That even though they're part of the Commonwealth, they don't put the Queen's face on our currency. This is what he said. I mean, this is his official reason. So they repeatedly ignored pleas by Indira Gandhi government to do something for these terrorists. They were organizing a bombing of a plane. They test detonated in front of Canadian intelligence forces who were there kind of watching. Did nothing. They did nothing. I mean, how different is this from Taliban and Al Qaeda? I have no idea other than that. Other than that, I don't know what is the difference. And I made this point in a tweet which went viral. What is the difference between them? So they refused to cooperate. And then once the bombing happened, they refused to investigate it. They would not prosecute. They would not allow them to be extradited. They would not prosecute the perpetrators. One of the perpetrators was ultimately sent to jail on a much watered down charge and then released after a few years. And this has been the reason why this is relevant. Is this has been the stance of Canada vis-a-vis Khalistani terrorists. This is the history. Now, come back to Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It's been a red corner notice. Canada has done nothing about it. So this is not just something which has happened in the history. Recently, after the 2019 agitations, Hindu temples have been targeted in Canada. The Trudeau government has done nothing. I mean, these guys who give Gannon lecture to everybody else. Like Trudeau was giving Gannon lecture to us during the farmers' agitation. It's unheard of for a political prime minister to comment on the internal politics of another quote-unquote friendly country. Nobody else does it. Nobody else did it except Trudeau. That's the amount of money he's taken. I mean, this doesn't come easy. So the thing is that for the Indian government, this is an act of self-defense. Again, one point which I find really amusing the symptomatic of this Western hypocrisy is that the Canadian government, whenever India makes any kind of extradition request, their bar for proof is this high. But their bar for making an accusation against India, zero evidence, no bar at all. So the hypocrisy, the reason why this hypocrisy isn't just something, it's a podcaster calls out. This hypocrisy basically permeates Canada's hypocrisy and racism, overt racism that permeates Canadian policy. Previous generations just used to treat this as, what can we do, man? But obviously, and this is again under the presumption that the Indian government did it, this government doesn't. Said, okay, you know what? If you're not going to do anything about this problem, and we've told you for decades, then we have the right, and this is a self-defense right, forget international justice. Any human being, if somebody comes to kill him or her, has a right to defend themselves. You cannot say that you can prove in court that this person would have killed me. You can kill that person, because that's, nobody can expect. So this, as a nation, this is self-defense. I mean, this was the exact argument used for Osama. It was the exact argument used for Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated by the Trump government. So the US has had no problems in using this. And at that point of time, there is no condemnation at all. They can say, rightfully say, that Iran is a terrorist state. This guy is a terrorist. Afghanistan is a terrorist state. The government supports the terrorists, so we have to go and take the guy out before that guy comes out and harms us. This is self-defense. It's the exact same argument that India has every right to use in this case, that Canada has for decades, and there's a long history of them refusing to prosecute, working in the interests of Khalistanis, and basically mollycoddling them, basically giving the oxygen for their violent agitation. And they have done it. It's just, when I say Canada, it's actually the Trudeau family. It's actually the Trudeau family. It's not anybody else. It's not even the Liberal Party. It's one family, a powerful family, but the Trudeaus. The Trudeaus are the real Khalistan agitation enablers. So at this point of time, under the presumption that India did it, I don't think that India did anything wrong. If the Americans can do it and the Canadians clap on the side, of course, they can't do anything. It's not that they don't want to do anything. They can't. Why are we held to a higher standard? I mean, 2019 activities, that kind of activity has stepped up. It's not that the timing is also not insignificant. So again, concluding, I think that I'm going to guess this is going to blow over in a while, but it's kind of been interesting, and I would like to hear from. I mean, I've heard a lot about from this from people, but I really would like to hear if any of you who know Canadian politics more than I do, and I don't claim to know Canadian politics much. I mostly follow Indian politics and US politics. I would like to know that if there's some angle that I missed, which I very well might have. So again, thank you everyone for following, and I'll see you next time on the Attention Please podcast. Till then, stay safe. Bye-bye.